Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, June 14th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness after the week we've had. Oh, my goodness, do I need a rest. All righty, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. In fact, we've got more to talk about than we've actually got time to talk about it in, but the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A lot of stuff going on, and, of course, the top story right now. Oh, and by the way, Claire will be joining us in the third hour today, for those of you who look forward to her commentary. Obviously, the top story is yesterday, in a desperate and pathetic and all too obvious effort to try and distract us all from Benghazi Gate and DOJ Gate and IRS Gate and NSA Gate and Prison Gate and EP8 and Gate and Flood Gate. The U.S. government declared that Syria had used chemical weapons on their people and they had crossed the red line and we were going off to war. And I think the most alarming part of all this is that apparently Obama and his advisors in the administration actually thought the American people were going to go for this. Forget all about Benghazi, forget all about IRS harassment, forget all about NSA spying on everything that we do, and we'd say, oh yes, we've got to get those evil Syrians here because they use chemical weapons on their people. And there's no foundation for this. There's zero evidence. The idea that Assad is using chemical weapons to gas his own tax base is no more grounded in reality than the claim that Saddam Hussein had nuclear bombs. It's like in Washington, D.C., they actually think we don't remember that. That whole thing about Iraq's nuclear weapons and what a danger they are, and say, we'll just try that one again. Those suckers, they'll fall for it over and over and over and over again. No, actually, we won't. And along with the stories and graphics I put up at my website, all over the web we saw these stories coming out here saying, are you kidding us? Over at the Economic Collapse blog, they had an article, is Obama starting a war with Syria just to distract us from the scandals? My response is that a trick question? Of course that's what he's doing. And he doesn't care how many of other people's children have to die horrible deaths as long as he escapes his self-made calamities. Of course it's that obvious. And they didn't get a lot of traction about that. Of course, the Russian government immediately came out and said, this is fabricated. They're being very polite about it. I'm not anywhere near that polite. The government lied, the government lied, the government lied, the government lied. They're flinging USDA choice bovine poo in every direction in a desperate attempt to distract from all that they've done. And it is important to remember that lie about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Remember, they had nuclear bombs, they had gas, they had germs, they had chemicals, they were going to strike Great Britain in just 45 minutes' time, and all of it was a lie. They invaded Iraq, they found nothing. The only thing that they found were the leftovers of the chemical weapons the U.S. government had given to Iraq to use on the Iranians. And they were rotted away. These things do not have a long shelf life. They're very unstable chemicals, and after so many years, it's just useless gunk. Rust, corrosion, all that stuff here. So we need to go back and say, yeah, they did lie to us about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. They lied to us about Pearl Harbor being a surprise. They lied to us about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. They lied to us about Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and they are lying about Assad's using chemical weapons on his own people. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about this desperate and pathetic attempt by the Obama administration, indeed by the government as a whole, to try and get their war agenda going again, to try and trick the American people into forgetting all about Benghazi, IRS harassment, Department of Justice spying on journalists, NSA spying on all of us. PRISM looting our computers, all of these constitutional violations. Oh, you don't want to think about that. We have Syrians to kill. We're going to bring you death and blood and gore, and you will admire it, and you'll salute the flag and line up behind your president like a loyal American ought to, and fling your money and your babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets. And the fact that they actually thought they had a chance of getting that to work is very, very alarming. Gets back to that whole idea that statistically at least 10% of those people are on these prescription antidepressants, probably more of them. I mean, after all, if you were destroying the United States of America, could you stay entirely calm without medication? There's some seriously faulty thinking going on over there in Sodom on the Potomac here. Now, of course, Great Britain, loyal friend of the United States, is out there saying, yes, we believe the United States when they say that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. I'm sorry, when they say Assad is using chemical weapons on his people. And you do need to remember, yeah, Great Britain was out there saying, oh, yes, Saddam has these things, he's going to use them, going to gas the British people in 45 minutes if we don't destroy him now. And it doesn't matter how many times a lie is sworn to by the friends and allies of the liar, it's still a lie, and we all know that. They are lying. There is no other word for it. They are lying, and they are pushing this idea that if you are a loyal citizen of the United States of America, or you are a loyal subject to Her Majesty, Highnessness the Queen, you will believe the lies. You don't question. You just go along with it because that's what makes our nation great. And there is no other way to put it. The Russians are being very polite about it, but they're saying basically the same thing. The United States is lying yet again to start another major war. And they have a long history of doing that, and we might as well face up to that and acknowledge it in the hope that we are going to be able to keep our children safe and home alive and healthy this time. Meanwhile, Hagel and the Israeli deputy minister are there in talks on how are they going to get this attack on Syria going. Which, by the way, is why they're wagging Nazis at us again. Now they're in Minnesota. Oh, we found this old Nazi. He's living in Minnesota. We're going to wave him at you. Nazi, 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 Nazi. I guarantee you on the cable channels over the weekend, we're going to see all these World War II movies about the Nazis and the Holocaust, because it's like a flashing neon sign. When Israel's going to haul off and just start a war with somebody, we get saturated with Nazis and Holocaust and Hitler and all the rest of that, which is why I'm so glad I have a DVD collection, because I am just fed up with all of that stuff. But it is. They're advertising. They're telegraphing the fact that, nobody bought this Syrian chemical weapons thing. And don't forget, it was only a few weeks ago the Turkish government caught the rebels, the hired mercenaries, with sarin gas. Oh, but we don't want to talk about that. It's Assad. He is evil. You've got to hate him on command. No, I will choose for myself who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, who I'm going to like and support, and who I will hate. And the hate list is actually kind of small, but it's of my own choosing. You don't get to decide for us who we like and who we don't like. It's not in the Constitution. The Constitution does not have a provision saying the federal government will choose for all Americans who they will like and who they will not like. It's not in there. And the more they wag Nazis at us, the more obvious it is they're trying to pre-build political cover for Israel, sympathy for Israel. Oh, yes, Israel bombed another innocent people into bloody shreds, but we should cut them some slack because of what movies and television showed us about World War II. And we're also getting word that they're going to try and justify the new invasion of Syria because Hezbollah is there. We've got to go after Hezbollah. Because they can't blame it on Al-Qaeda, because in Syria, the U.S. is supporting Al-Qaeda. They needed a new villain. We're not going to blame this on Al-Qaeda because they're actually working for us. We've got to blame Hezbollah. Let's go after Hezbollah. So, I gather from the overnight polls that Obama did not get a lot of traction on this. Red line. It's a new red line. Maybe they need to get Benjamin Netanyahu back up there with his cartoon bomb thing, so we can at least get a good giggle out of all of this. Russia is saying the U.S. is lying about chemical weapons use. I wouldn't worry about that. There's only about maybe 7 billion other human beings on Earth that are in agreement with this. The United Nations, Great Britain, and Germany will not support a direct U.S. intervention. So even though Great Britain is out there saying, oh, yes, we believe them about the chemical weapons, even Great Britain is pulling back from this. Now, don't forget, it was not all that long ago that this story broke in the British press and was then removed, but too late because it was copied off all over the Internet, how the U.S. backed a plan to launch chemical weapon attacks on Syrian people and blame it on Assad. And the Obama administration greenlit this. It was a supported story. It was in the UK Guardian. And I think it was also run in the Daily Mail. And it's out there. And of course, who was it who was actually caught with the chemical weapons? The hired mercenaries. Turkey caught them with sarin gas. And so we know the United States government all along had this plan. We're going to gas the Syrian people, and we're going to say Assad did it because that's how we start the war. Maybe that worked back in the 1950s and the 1940s and the 1930s and 1920s, but it is a very different world today. And apparently, judging from the fact that they still are trying the same worn-out, tired propaganda stunts all over again, the people inside Washington, D.C. still don't get it. The propaganda tricks that worked a half a century ago do not work today. The world has fundamentally changed around them. The flow of information through society has fundamentally changed around them, and they don't get it. And they can't adapt. Because we are now living in a world where the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. And for a government that rules through lies, fraud, and deception, that is a major, major problem. Maybe they've just been in denial all this time. Oh, it was a fluke they caught us about 9/11. Oh, it was just random. Oh, it's just some troublemakers pointing out all the problems in the official story. No, it isn't. It's all of us. 300 million Americans know we cannot trust this government. They're looking for reasons to never trust the official story. And, of course, they're finding them. Because the government continues to lie, because that's all they know how to do. They have been ruling this nation with lies, fraud, and deception for so long, they forgot any other way to run a government. And now they're really trapped about it. Meanwhile, over in Germany, this was reported over in StratRisks, German intelligence is once again confirming 95% of the so-called Free Syrian Army are not Syrian. They are hired mercenaries brought in from other countries to work for the United States to overthrow Assad and make it look like it was a popular uprising. But when you have these groups going around and killing civilians, committing atrocities, you know it's not a genuine popular uprising. A genuine popular uprising does not kill their own. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson wandering around colonial America, burning down schools and churches and killing children. Wouldn't have defeated the British that way. Now, Sweden has gone on record slamming the new U.S. weapons to the Syrian hired mercenary army. That's as far as they're going so far. They've committed to sending small arms to the so-called Syrian rebels. But they're holding off on the no-fly zone that everybody, McCain and Graham seem to want. They're not sending in anti-tank or anti-aircraft weapons at this point. And I think what this tells us, if this propaganda trick of chemical weapons had gotten traction with the American public in the overnight polls, they'd be sending everything today. So they're waking up to the reality that the American people and the rest of the world just aren't buying another claim about weapons of mass destruction. We have been lied to so many times. Why would we accept anything this government says at face value? Now, as you know, there's this huge debate. Actually, I forgot. We got a caller waiting on the line before I get into this next thing. Kent, West Virginia, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, Mike.
Thank you for waiting. I lost track of you on the message board. What's on your mind?
Well, I came up with a musical opportunity for you. I came up with a little, I guess you call it a rhyme or a verse or a refrain or something. But, you know, you've got Gulf of Tonkin and you've got Gas of Sarin. So there's a nice little rhyme. And I was thinking in terms of the old well-known Christmas carol, Gulf of Tonkin, Gas of Sarin. You know how it goes.
Yeah, I know how that works. Yeah.
And I could almost see a nice choir. Mormon Tabernacle choir of 100 voices singing that. I thought that'd be beautiful. But yeah, I think it'd be good. I know you're into music, or your wife's into music.
We're both into music, but my wife is the musical star far and away, and I'll mention it to her. She's going to be joining us again in the third hour. We're coming up here to a commercial break, so Kent, thank you for waiting, and thank you for the musical suggestion. I'll pass that along. We're going to take a break for some commercials. When we come back, more developments from Sweden regarding this rush to war in Syria. So we'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, welcome back to the show. And as I mentioned before I took that phone call, Sweden has come out adamantly opposed to the United States escalating the situation in Syria by providing arms to the hired mercenary army, like the U.S. hasn't been doing it all along anyway. And now Sweden is saying they are going to send their troops to the Golan Heights as peacekeepers. As you know, Putin was going to send Russian troops to replace the current peacekeepers who are rotating out, and the U.S. and Israel did a big stink about, no, Russia can't put their troops on the ground there. They're a permanent member of the Security Council. Their troops can't be peacekeepers, which is nonsense because the U.S. sends their troops as peacekeepers all over the world. But Sweden has done an end round around that. They are going to send their troops to the Golan Heights to be the new peacekeepers, and they are obviously opposed to any escalation in the war. And Israel and the U.S. can't do a thing about it because Sweden is not a permanent member of the Security Council. Checkmate on that particular issue. Speaking of the United Nations, once again they are issuing warnings to the hired mercenary army in Syria regarding these atrocities they keep committing. And foolishly keep putting on video to put out there to show how manly and butch and tough they are, and you better go along with us or more will happen. And it isn't working. It's just hardening the resolve of the Syrian people to stand with their government against this obvious outside aggression. So John McCain and Lindsey Graham are out there screaming, there has to be a no-fly zone. We've got to deny the Syrian government their air force and their airspace. By the way, when you send your warplanes and missiles into somebody else's country without permission, that is an act of war. So that's what McCain and Lindsey Graham are calling for, an act of war. We're not going to call it that. We're going to call it some other euphemism so you don't realize that the U.S. are the aggressors here. And, of course, as always, hey, John and Lindsey, if you really feel that way, here are your rifles, here are your parachutes. We'll call Assad and tell him you're on your way. But this latest bovine excrement about Syrian chemical weapons being used on the people by Assad has no more foundation in reality than the claim about Saddam's nuclear weapons. We're going to sit this one out. If you want that war that badly, you go fight it. Your kids go fight it. You pay for it out of your wallet. Now, just before airtime, we got a story that Assad's government has mounted a major assault to recapture the city of Aleppo. Apparently, they are reporting that U.S. drones have been spotted over Syria, keeping an eye on things, which is a violation of their sovereign airspace. And last night, I saw this very alarming article, which I thought I'd link to what really happened, but I can't put my hand on it right now, where one of these Washington, D.C. think tank analysts had come out and said, Russia will probably back down. When we go into Syria, for all of its bluster and threats and stuff, Russia's not going to go in. They don't want to be associated with a government that uses chemical weapons. Well, talk about dangerous and naive, wishful thinking. First of all, nobody's buying this chemical weapon stuff. Russia's already come out and said it's a fabrication. So the idea that being associated with Assad is going to be a political liability for Russia is a moot point. Russia understands this invasion of Syria isn't really about Syria. It is merely the next step on the U.S. plan to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, where the U.S. paper dollar is the unchallenged global currency. And Russia doesn't want to go there. Hardly anybody does. Russia understands that since they took control of their central bank, they are now on the special high-interest targets list by the private central bankers that rule over so much of the West right now. Russia knows war is coming between the U.S. and Russia. And Russia remembers how the Nazis got within 20 miles of Moscow before they were finally stopped at huge loss of Russian life. And so from Russia's point of view, if war is coming anyway, better it be fought in Syria and Iran than in the streets of Moscow. And so these articles coming out saying, don't worry about invading Syria, Russia will back down, they're deranged. They're either not taking enough of their SSRIs or they're taking way too many. But they are not thinking clearly. They're just hoping and wishing that things are going to work out on this plan that's clearly falling apart. And they're writing it down and saying, this is why we should keep going on what we're doing and pray for a miracle to the imaginary playmate in the sky. Now, Claire's going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but I feel like it's worth mentioning right now that the U.S. is going to keep their military forces in Jordan. Remember when the Turkish protests and riots really took off, and it looked like the U.S. could actually lose Turkey as a launching point for a ground invasion of Syria, and they started shifting things down to Jordan, and they sent in F-16 fighter planes and Patriot batteries and a whole bunch of troops to Jordan, ostensibly for a military exercise. The exercise is over. The weapons and troops will stay in Jordan. They're going to keep the assets in place. So this training exercise was a cover story. If there's going to be a ground invasion of Syria by the U.S., it's going to come in from Jordan and not Turkey here. All right, we got a caller. Well, actually, we're coming up on a commercial break. So, Robert, stay there, drink some coffee, throw some water on your face. We'll take your call when we come back from these. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a phone call here. Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, hey, good afternoon. When you brought up the Swedish troops going on to the Golan there, it brought up my conspiratorial sick mind, brought some scenarios up, and I'm like, okay, what's going to happen to Sweden now? Are they going to get their own version of the Andres Breivik guy? Shoot up
Could
a school
very well
out
happen.
there?
Could very well happen. Have you noticed how all these horrible terror attacks always happen to those countries that aren't 100% on board the U.S. agenda?
Yeah, and then I work with a Swede actually at my job, and he's not a U.S. citizen. He's just got his work visa and everything, but he talks about how sick his country's become with just the flood of people from all over the world. That the little controllers up there in Sweden have let the floodgates open as far as immigration into his country. And he says what just an insane place it is. And I was like, well, that'll be a good opportunity to do a Islamic terror attack up there in Sweden as well, because there's so many folks of that persuasion living in that country now. So that could be a good false flag as well to turn the Swedish people 100% behind the U.S. Israeli-British agenda.
Well, not just Sweden. I mean, I was seeing it on the corporate media early today where everybody's back on this Islamofascism, and those Muslims, they hate us, and they don't really have a good reason to do that just because we're bombing all of their countries into rubble and blowing up their children with drones. That's no reason to hate the United States. They hate us for our freedoms. They hate us because they're really ramping up the propaganda. They're desperate to find some way that they will motivate the American people into going along with this idea of a grand extermination campaign against the evil Muslims all over the world, and it's really not working. Of course, are they desperate enough to try a new 9/11, something even more spectacular? Because knocking over another building, it's old hat. Seen it, been there, done that, don't want the T-shirt. Will they set off a nuclear bomb someplace in the United States of America? Remember, there's still one unaccounted nuclear bomb left over from that weird bomber flight over the U.S. a couple of years back, where it took off with 6 weapons on the wing and landed with 5, and the flight crew all died in strange, weird accidents in the months after that. And, of course, Israel could very easily, probably does have 1 or 2 nuclear bombs here in the United States of America, because if you go back to the beginning of Israel's nuclear program, they were getting their weapons-grade fissionables from here in the United States of America. There was this Israeli-linked company called NUMEC, which was a radioactive reprocessing plant, had a huge amount of highly refined uranium went missing before it was shut down. There was a scandal at the Savannah River plant where with a large material unaccounted for, or a MUF is the acronym, where they said there's enough material missing to build a couple of bombs, and then 24 hours later they said, not to worry, it's probably just plated on the inside of the plumbing, nothing to see here, blah, 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 blah. But it's an open secret that Israel built their first-generation nuclear bombs with fissionables, weapons-grade uranium they got from here in the United States of America. So if you're Israel and you're getting this stuff in the United States of America to build a whole bunch of bombs, it's very easy to leave enough behind in the U.S. to build a bomb. Because building a bomb is building the uranium bomb is trivial. It's a big, long pipe. You have two masses of weapons-grade uranium at each end below the critical mass. And when you set it off, you just slap those pieces of uranium together. They go bang. That's the uranium bomb. And so we know, and let me finish this thought here. So, we have all these controls at the borders to keep people from smuggling weapons-grade uranium into the country. I don't know that it's all that effective, but Israel got it here in the country. They could have just left it behind, built bombs around it. We do know that when the Nuclear Emergency Search Team was developing their baseline maps for New York, so that they could identify a new radioactive source. If they were having to hunt for something, they found a great deal of radiation coming out of Israel's consulate in New York, which is still unexplained to this very day. Israel will, it's our sovereign territory, diplomatic immunity, you can't come in and search. But we do know there's a great deal of radioactivity on that ground. They could have a bomb in the basement. So if everybody at the consulate all of a sudden gets on a plane for Israel, better be time to get out of New York there. Go ahead.
And I heard these reports back in like 79. The head of the Mossad was talking about the two pillars going to go down at some time in the future. And heck, that was 20 some odd years later that happened. But back to the Swedish troops for a second. Watch them. They'll put the troops on the border, and then some chemical weapons will hit them. That'll be a good one there too.
Could very well be. I mean, we make light of this. We're making jokes about just how pathetic and desperate all of this is. But we do need to remember, they are desperate. Obama is feeling very cornered right now because of Floodgate. Israel is feeling very frustrated because this agenda to get America to fight their wars and go into Syria and eventually Iran. Iran is what Israel is drooling over breaking up. And it's stumbled. It's blocked. They can't get support for it. And so desperate people take desperate chances. And they have to know, I hope they know, based on how quickly we tore apart the official story on 9/11, that a new false flag terror attack is going to be presumed to be the work of the U.S. or Israel or both. But they may be desperate enough to try and say, let's make it so big and so dangerous they won't dare take the chance it's not true. Which is why, instead of a nuclear bomb, they could dust maybe 3 or 4 American cities with anthrax and say, oh, that came from Syria and it came from Iran. And, and just try and get something so terrifying, something so immediate. See, when, if you knock over a building in New York, people outside the state of New York, it's remote news. But if you have anthrax on cities all across America, then everybody's wondering around, wow, are the spores in the air I'm breathing right now? To maximize that fear. So they could very easily be thinking about something like that and just hope that if they make it so big and so horrific and so threatening that Americans will just lose their skepticism and go back to saluting the flag, blah, 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 blah. I don't think it's going to work, but there are some very desperate people in government right now. At least 10%, if not more, are doped up on these prescription psychiatric drugs, and they're not thinking clearly because of it. And that's a lethal combination.
Well, they're also sloppy as heck. Look at Aurora, Sandy Hook, and Boston. How pathetically, that was like so novice, like that people pick these operations apart so quickly now. People have gotten their eyes and their minds trained to see this deception now. It's where it's just like, and I know that this is a small segment of the larger population of people that actually can, perceive the propagandistic nature of these false flags and the deceptive nature, but it's just like, one good thing is it's so heartening to see how immediately after these ops that people just start deconstructing them and just pointing out these just I mean, I don't want to sound like a sicko, but like these hilarious anomalies that it's just like, you guys need to practice at your stuff more because you're terrible at these things.
Well, that's what I was saying about those pictures of the phony dead Osama a while back. You know, if you were in my computer animation visual effects class at UH, I would have flunked all of you guys for the poor quality work. But, you know, as sort of a reference point, if you go back and you look at the Kennedy assassination with today's wisdom and eyes, that was equally sloppy. They did a lot of really stupid things, like trying to take a picture from the Daltex building to prove the single bullet theory, and you got the Texas School Book Depository actually in camera at frame right. The difference is, back in 1963, you know, those people who were picking up on these problems and inconsistencies, they could maybe tell 4 or 5 of their friends, and that was it. Today, with the Internet, anybody who finds a problem gets it out there. And now, of course, the American people are not willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt that they were back in 1963. That's how I got started on this. I didn't decide all the way back in 1994 that I was going to, you know, destroy my film career and go off and be this counterculture, peace activist, blogger, wacko, tinfoil hat, Fruit Loop conspiracy theorist. It was completely an accident. I was just working in my office, and I was watching the news feed on the switcher, and this photo came on of the hand of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster in Fort Marcy Park, together with the gun with which they said he shot himself. And because visual effects and making film fakery look realistic was my business, the instant I looked at that picture, I said, this is a setup. This is sloppy work. This is not real. And you know, I didn't intend to come down this path in life. I really didn't. And I went out and I looked at the FBI's records, and I found evidence of absolute fraudulent manufacture of testimony. And like a good, law-abiding American citizen, I tried to call attention to the fact that we were looking at a murder made to look like a suicide. And naive that I was, I thought our society and our government would say, oh, yes, that is a murder. We must investigate. And, of course, instead, you know, I got blacklisted out of Hollywood and threatened and all this other stuff that has since followed. But today, again, it is a very different world. You've got 300 million Americans who are looking for reasons not to trust the official story. And we have a government that runs its propaganda with public relations firms and advertising companies that are just used to trial balloon, focus group. And as a result, every time they put out one of these trial balloons and it fades and they try a different thing, it makes it obvious we're looking at all these trial balloons and suggestions. The narrative is blurred, or they've lost the narrative. There's no clear focus and presentation for what the message of the propaganda is supposed to be. And that just makes it all much more obvious. They're just out there saying, it's like the old Maxwell Smart TV series with Don Adams, the original one. Mel Brooks produced it. It was a funny show. It was one of my father's favorite shows. And there was this running gag where Maxwell Smart would be in trouble and said, would you believe that this building is surrounded by 5,000 crack commandos? And the bad guy would say, no, I wouldn't believe that. Said, would you believe this building is surrounded by a troop of Boy Scouts? And the guy says, no, I wouldn't believe that. Said, would you believe there's a toothless guard dog out there? And it just kept going down to find the level that people would believe. And in Maxwell Smart, it was funny and comical, but we see our government propagandists doing exactly the same thing. Would you believe that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction? Or would you believe that Iran has weapons of mass destruction? No, we don't believe that. Would you believe they have chemicals? No. Would you believe they have slingshots and spitwads? Well, maybe, but that's not a reason to go to war.
Yeah. Hey, well, check this out. I just happened to see Fox News this morning. My girlfriend had it on. And
you have my deepest sympathies.
But check it out. You should have seen the propaganda going this morning about Sarin VX. I mean, it was the exact same darn thing right before the Iraq buildup. It was so sick to see it this morning. It just made me want to snap because of, I mean, and they think that we're all so ADD that we're going to forget this. But it was just gross on Fox News this morning.
Have you noticed that even Fox News has stopped mentioning IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, Benghazi? Certainly Benghazi. That's the deepest, darkest secret they're trying to bury with all this stuff. NSA spying has gone off the corporate media. PRISM has gone off the corporate media. They've been given their marching orders. You must sell this war to the American people. You have to sell the new car. You have to sell them GMO. You have to sell them human-caused global warming, and you've got to sell them the war. Yeah,
good old Pravda and Xinhua is cranked up into high gear. I get it.
Yeah, it's what the propagandists like to call a full court press. We're going to call in all the chips. Everybody will get on board, and we'll present this united front to the American people, and they will believe it. And no, we don't, because we know the corporate media is full of bovine excrement, most of which they get from the U.S. government. And we can't believe anything the government says, and we can't believe anything the corporate media says, except the sports scores and the weather, and they're not even all that good on the weather.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Mike, take care, man.
All right. So if the government and the corporate media thought that wagging the Syria at us was going to make us forget about all those other scandals, not going to work. We're still talking about them out here in the independent media, and we're going to go on talking about them. Interesting little article came in, and this was actually in the New York Times, but not called much attention to, talking about yet another one of these code name programs. And this one was called Stellar Wind, another operation by the NSA. This is the one that began right after 9/11, where they started putting all this tapping equipment into computers and telephone systems. And apparently, internally to the government, this was so controversial, there were a couple of top Justice Department officials wanted to resign in protest in 2004. So we know this has been going on since 2001. 12 years. And one way that we know that, of course, is in their latest attempts to smear Edward Snowden. They're coming out with these articles about how, this guy was working on all this top-secret stuff, but he was on Facebook, and he was posting this, and he was posting that, and it should have been a warning that he was going to be a turncoat and a traitor. And what this story admits is actually two things. They have been saving your Facebook posts for the last 12 years, and two, they can't get any usable data out of it because they had all that information, and this guy still caught them by surprise. They've admitted they had recorded phone calls and social media, computer stuff for the Sarnia brothers in Boston and couldn't stop them, if you believe that official story, and I pointedly do not. Now, let's see. Over in Extra Public TV, NSA is now known to be spying on all the people and all the businesses, not just in the United States of America, but Great Britain. It is a global spy operation, and the British people are very, very upset. And they understand there's this little dodge going on with their own government about, we're not going to spy on our own people. We'll have the Americans do it and just give us the stuff. Oh, just amazing, amazing stuff here. Now, as you know, we are hearing from the United States government that all of this spying is legal. It's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. We have a court ruling that says this is not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And we're saying, all right, show us this. And they said, well, we can't. It's a secret law. It's a secret order. And it has to remain secret because it's secret. Just take our word for it. This is all constitutional. And it can't be. And don't forget, the United States Supreme Court already ruled in Marbury versus Madison, laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. John F. Kennedy used to state the same thing in his speeches. Laws repugnant to the Constitution, they're automatically null and void. You don't have to obey them. You don't have to accept them. Absolutely not true. Dianne Feinstein is out there saying, really, it's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment for us to get all your phone records. Yeah, it is. She came out here with this ludicrous idea that surveillance on you is justified if they just believe you might have something they need to look at. No, it isn't. Go back and read that Fourth Amendment. There must be a warrant specifying what they're looking at. And it has to be backed up by probable cause, backed by oath or affirmation, not somebody's belief or wishful thinking. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And more revelations are coming out about the scale and scope of this spy computer operation here. Now, you're probably already aware, if you own any kind of a computer, that every once in a while you will get these security updates that come in to fix vulnerabilities as they are discovered. And Microsoft and these other companies sort of have a reputation of, as soon as we find these, we will let you know. And it turns out that that is a little bit less than accurate. It has now come out, and this is being reported over in gigaom.com, that Microsoft and other U.S. software firms, as they find security flaws, they will inform the intelligence agencies first in case this is going to be classified and kept secret so the NSA can use it against you. And then only after they have sort of cleared their skirts with the NSA, CIA, FBI, NRO, whoever else is in on the distribution list, then and only then are you allowed to be informed about the security flaw and take corrective action. What it basically means is the NSA wants first dibs on any really juicy security holes that they can use for their nefarious purposes. Now, as I said before, and this is reported over at antiwar.com, Dianne Feinstein is out there saying the NSA doesn't need a court order to search your phone records. They just have to have a reasonable cause to believe somebody's connected to terrorism. Well, don't forget, right now in this country, pretty much every one of us qualify as a terror suspect under this very broad list of indicators they've drawn up. If you support the Constitution and talk about it, you're a terror suspect. Oh, he talked about the Constitution. That's it. I can look at his phone records. Without a court order, without a warrant, Dianne Feinstein said so. And that, of course, is absurd. You have to go back to that Fourth Amendment. Oh, my goodness, he said Fourth Amendment is a terror suspect. Waterboard his laptop. Too late, TSA dropped and broke it. Thank you very much here. Daniel Ellsberg is out on record saying the Stasi in East Germany could never even dream of what the NSA is able to collect on citizens. We've gone way past Stasi. We've gone way past Gestapo. We've gone way past the SS. We've gone way past what the GRU and KGB could do. They wanted total information awareness, and it looks like they've got it. And I have to wonder, based on my understanding of how databases and searches work, they have so much data there, a septillion bytes of data. They may be drowning in their own wealth of data. They may not actually be able to get all that much out of there that's useful. We know they say they had all the information on the Boston bombers before it happened. Couldn't stop them. Couldn't stop Fort Hood. Couldn't stop the crotch bomber. If you accept the official story of these terror attacks, every single one of them represents a failure of this surveillance system at huge cost. America, welcome back to the show here, and following up on my comment about how the corporate media has been given their marching orders to drop all references to Floodgate. I came back in here to sit down, and they're talking about some celebrity just had a baby, beautiful baby blonde hair. Good for the mother, good for the father. I'm sure they're very happy. Doesn't affect my life. Doesn't affect your life. Remember, the news that you need to know is what affects your life. The economy, the wars, government spying, government corruption, targeting by the IRS. Celebrity news? No. And this, by the way, this is the top of the hour. They're bringing this stuff. All righty, let's see. I heard a strange little noise here. Let me turn that down here. The revelation of all this spying, one possible reason it all came out now has to do with scaring the American people. And as some of these earlier revelations came out, where they're talking about, we're listening to you, we're watching you, may have been an attempt to convince Americans to stay silent and separate and isolated, which was the strategy that the Nazis followed in Germany. Because the reality is the Gestapo and the SS really couldn't keep an eye on everybody. There weren't that many of those uniformed thugs compared to the size of the German population. But they deliberately crafted this reputation and this legend that their eyes and ears were everywhere. They saw everything. They heard everything. And it was simply an attempt to keep the German people silent, even as the German people began to realize something had gone horribly wrong with their country. And I often wondered if maybe some of this information about government spying was being deliberately leaked to have the same effect on the American people. And if that was the case, obviously it has failed. This revelation of the NSA copying all of our phone calls, and we know they're recording the content. That metadata isn't all that useful without the content, because they don't know if they're looking at a wrong number. And all this data off our computers going back 10 years may have been to convince us, oh, stop blogging, stop sharing what you know with the rest of America. If you've spotted something wrong with the government, you just keep it to yourself. And if that was part of the agenda, boy, did that fail. Because we have seen this mass anger throughout the entire population, uniting us all together as a single American people, focused on the government's abuse of power and tyranny. We have this article over at RINF.com where there's this unprecedented uniting of all different aspects of Americans, united in anger and rage at this surveillance on all the people, a clear sign of tyranny. And you have a right to be angry. And contrary to all these statements coming out from people like Dianne Feinstein, no, the government does not have an automatic right to peek at your life. Remember that Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the rules the government is required to follow in order to be allowed by we the people to run this nation. The government is not the boss. The government is the janitor that we the people have hired to take care of the place. And they have to follow those rules or they're not the legal, legitimate government any longer. Diane. Now, another little aspect about this, another article over at RINF.com, was a reminder of all the times that the ADL has been caught spying on Americans on behalf of Israel. And don't forget that big, huge Israeli spy scandal that broke a few years back involving AIPAC. And, you know, oh, horrible, horrible stuff, and they're taking information and giving it to Israel. And, of course, the hidden part of that story was all the false information about Iraq that Israel was feeding into the U.S. government through that same spy chain. But nobody wants to talk about that. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And just following up on what I was mentioning before, we've had major spy scandals by Israel in this country. They don't go reported very much. The NSA spying got a lot more coverage, and they're supposed to be the good guys on our side. But we had the ADL spying on Americans on behalf of Israel. There was an out-of-court settlement on that one. We had the Israeli spy ring, the largest foreign spy ring ever uncovered in this country in the weeks just before 9/11. It got one news story by Carl Cameron on Fox News, four-part story that Fox News then took off their website at the request of AIPAC, who only a couple of years later were caught in their own spy scandal. But somehow the corporate media doesn't feel that you really are all that interested in a foreign government conducting these kind of spy operations. And I've noticed, even though earlier in the week when they were covering the NSA spy scandal, none of the large corporate media outlets mentioned the fact that so many Israeli-linked companies were contracted to do the actual work, to put in the equipment, to plug in the wires, and they're connected with Israeli intelligence. Yes, it was all the NSA, and they're the good guys, and you should just go along with it. In a pig's eye. Somebody wrote in and pointed out the article that I was talking about earlier. Oh, and it was in Business Insider, and I'm reprising it to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Why Russia will almost certainly back down in Syria. And as I mentioned before, this is a classic case of just so wanting to believe that this is all going to work out that you're just grasping at straws. And they're out there saying Russia doesn't want to be associated with Assad if he's using chemical weapons on his people. Well, Russia's already come out and said they're not buying that anyway. And so this whole article is based on a flawed assumption. Garbage in, garbage out. Another interesting little article, and this came out on, pardon me, naturalnews.com. And it basically goes along with what I was just saying about the celebrity birth announcements and the rest of that. The corporate media, it continues to lose credibility because they'll report on the stories that are big news out here in the independent media, and then they quickly try and go away and report on something else. And they're giving a lot of time about Syria, and they're back to bashing on Snowden, but no mention of Benghazi Gate. DOJ spying on reporters in Congress has kind of gone away. The IRS targeting conservative groups, that's kind of gone away. Oh, those are last week's impeachment articles. We don't want to talk about those. But the corporate media has lost credibility. And they did it to themselves. I know in the corporate media boardrooms like to say, gosh darn internet and those gosh darn bloggers, they're wrecking things for us. No, if you've lost your audience, it's because you were caught lying to them. None of the independent media out here would even exist if we could rely on the corporate media to tell us what's really going on in the world. Do you think we like doing this? It's a lot of work, a lot of harassment, very negative impacts on our quality of life. Nobody's making money out here doing this. My life is materially considerably worse off having followed this path than if I'd simply been allowed to stay in Hollywood. But government and corporate media, in their arrogance, want to go on lying to you, and now that it's not working any longer, they're whining and crying and saying, gosh darn it, they so want to go back to the glory days of the Cold War when they could just tell us anything at all and we would believe and throw our babies onto the designated enemy bayonets here. Interesting little soundbite came out of the congressional hearings into the IRS scandal, in which the FBI director basically was unable to even identify who the lead investigator is in that IRS targeting case. We're back to seeing the I'm clueless defense. I have no memory. My brain is void. I have no idea what's going on here. Therefore, you can't throw me in prison. Remember back when there was a congressional investigation into all of this Federal Reserve cash that was flowing out the door, all of it loans against the American people's future? And we had that lady from the Federal Reserve saying, oh, we're not keeping track of it. It's not my job. I don't have the numbers. I have no idea where it went. Anyway. Over at From the Trenches World Report, they've got an article on central banks' bubble bursting, sending markets down worldwide. That was certainly true for most of the week. Yesterday, obviously, the plunge protection team ran that Dow back up to protect the solvency, or the illusion of solvency, of America's banking sector. I'm looking at the markets right now, and even though the plunge protection team is massaging that market as hard as they can for the traditional Friday happy ending, it doesn't look like they're going to get there. We're about an hour before the close of the market. Dow is down 87. Other markets are down proportionately as well. Today is the day that Detroit has officially defaulted on their debts. I imagine there's probably some credit default swaps out there that are being dusted off. And we're getting from Detroit's emergency financial manager, it's time for shared sacrifice. And I'm sure the Detroit people are saying, how come when you say shared sacrifice, it's we, the people, that have to be doing the sacrificing? Because the money junkies are still doing great. They think life is swell. But Detroit has been forced to declare a moratorium on all their debt payments for unsecured funding. And so they're technically in default. And the other day I saw this article where photographers had gone around Detroit, which used to be considered one of our finest cities in America. It represented America's manufacturing might. And it looks like scenes out of that TV series Life After People that's on one of the educational channels about how quickly our civilization would fall apart and leave no remains if all the humans were simply wiped out tomorrow. Some idiot over at the bioweapons lab drops a test tube and we're gone. And I imagine probably they have filmed many of these segments using locations in Detroit because it's tragic. And when you look at it, you realize America is a failing nation when we have portions of our country that are looking like that, because the rot is spreading. Nobody's going back in to repair or replace the buildings. They're just allowed to rot, and the rot continues to spread. Why? Because all of the wealth of the nation is being siphoned up by that private central bank loaning the public currency at interest. It is a failed banking system, and the only people who really like it are the private central bankers who are willing to go to war to keep it going. And, of course, the politicians that they are able to buy with so much of that wealth that they loot from you through this scam. And it is a scam. It's a fraud. It's time to stop being polite about what's going on in this country. Government is lying. Banking is crooked. Corporate media fibs. It's time to face up to what's really going on in this country here. Another story coming out of SenseOnSense.com regarding Bank of America's mortgage operations. Remember that whole foreclosure gate situation? Robo-signing mortgage documents, fake notaries, All the rest of that stuff, I think I still have my notary stamp for the state of Ohio. I can go out and pretend to be a notary for the state of Ohio. Nobody was looking at any of this stuff. They were just grabbing houses to put on the balance sheet to keep themselves in the black here. And now we're hearing from some of Bank of America's own people, they were being told to lie by bank management. Don't worry if it's legal or not. Nothing's going to happen. And nothing did. Back in 2008, the Bush administration set it as government policy that nobody inside this mortgage-backed security fraud or the follow-up foreclosure fraud were going to be arrested or prosecuted. They were given a license to loot by the federal government. They were given a license to pillage the wealth of the American people to keep those most holy journals, spreadsheets, accounts books, ledgers, whatever you want to call them. They're sacrosanct. They must be kept in the black, no matter what sacrifices the people have to make. And we live in a country in which the government views banks, which are just buildings with a bunch of paper inside, as more important and worthy of protection than we, the American people. And that is a very sick point of view. When you put banks above people, you're in trouble right there. Story out of Investment Watch blog. Apparently the latest polls are showing among investors an overwhelming majority see that the stock market is going to have to tank worse than it did in 2008. They've blown a stock bubble. Huge stock bubble. There's a treasury bond bubble. Everything's been bubbled up to try and make the system look like it's still working. And there's no underlying value. There's no underlying way to redeem all these bonds that are being put out there. Japan's bonds are crashing. The government is still out there saying, don't worry, the U.S. Treasury bonds, they're still good as gold because we're going to let all these new Americans in to be taxpayers to pay them all off. But they're printing out those Treasury bonds faster than they're allowing the illegals to become citizens. It's all fraud by now. It's all illusion. It's all a theater show that they're putting on. Another article over at Ex-Republic TV that Obamacare is in serious, serious trouble on two fronts. And the first one is that Americans and government officials at the state, community level are realizing they got screwed. The actual costs for Obamacare are way above what we were all told it was going to be when this policy was put through. Now, we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come back, I want to talk about Glenn Beck, because earlier in the week he announced a big, huge breaking story, which has yet to materialize, but there is a rumor what it might be. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about Glenn Beck, who earlier in the week teased a breaking story of a new whistleblower that was absolutely going to rock the government to its foundations. And he basically teased this on Wednesday, said he would break the story in 24 hours, which was yesterday. We haven't heard anything from Glenn Beck. And I have to wonder why Glenn Beck would tease this story 24 hours in advance, because in this country, that's a great way to have a tragic accident happen before you can get your story out. Maybe he was fishing for hush money and somebody met his price. But there is a rumor floating around the net, and it's not original with Glenn Beck, but the rumor is that the NSA had the goods on the United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts. Because if you remember, going back to Obamacare, Roberts was opposed to it. It was unconstitutional. And then at the last second, Roberts came up with this very convoluted legal justification for why all of a sudden it wasn't unconstitutional. And Obamacare was blessed by the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Roberts split for a 2-week vacation outside the country. I think he went over to Malta. And a lot of people, ever since, even at the time it happened, they said somebody got to Roberts. The behavior was not that of a consistent jurist who's going along saying unconstitutional, 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 and then all of a sudden at the last second, oh, I've changed my mind, it's constitutional, I'm on a vacation. And since the NSA story came out, where now we know every single American, including members of Congress, including judges on the Supreme Court, were being monitored for all their phone calls and all of their emails and all their text messages and all of that stuff. A lot of people have been asking, is this what was used to get Chief Justice Roberts to do his about-face on Obamacare? And this is an important question to be asking, because we remember in history how J. Edgar Hoover, when he was head of the FBI, was legendary for his private secret files that had all the dirt on politicians' extramarital affairs and questionable associations and questionable orientations. This is back when being gay was really thought of as icky poo. And he used that. He even blackmailed President John F. Kennedy into changing U.S. government policy. Think back to Whitewater, when somebody got hold of a recording of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky's phone sex and used it to pressure Clinton into ordering the FBI to stop looking for Israel's top mole in the administration. So when you have this group of unelected people with access to all of your private information, the potential for that institution, the NSA, to covertly take control of the entire U.S. government and financial system cannot be ignored. Now, as I recall, there's been one other time in recent memory where Glenn Beck pre-announced he was going to have a huge blockbuster story, and it went away. So this is getting to be a habit. All righty, let's see. Now, as I mentioned before, anytime Israel is going to haul off and start a war, whether they're going to go in and just attack Syria or they're just going to go ahead and bomb those power stations and medical isotope companies in Iran, they signal it. We get Nazis wagged at us. It's play wag the Nazi time. They got one up in Minnesota. They've got this top commander. And at this point, there are so few of them left. The next thing you know, they're going to be digging in the graveyards. We got to dig up a Nazi, put some makeup on him, put some animatronics in him so he can do this, so we can wave it around and say, oh, you've got to feel sorry for Israel. Doesn't matter what Israel does today, only remember the horrors of the Nazis. And I haven't looked at the cable guide yet, but I'm willing to bet a whole plugged Turkish piaster that we're going to see all kinds of World War II and Hitler and Nazi and Holocaust stuff all over the cable fair this weekend. It's predictable. It's regular as clockwork. And once again, we're seeing the ramping up of the anti-Iran rhetoric. We have this Israeli minister is claiming Iran wants to build 30 nuclear bombs a year. Be afraid, be very afraid here. Apparently the head of Mossad is currently in Ankara, and he's basically telling the Turkish government, oh, those protests in your streets, that's not the Turkish people, it's Iran. Iran has come in here to cause all kinds of trouble. And I think if this hired mercenary army in Syria collapses, which is likely at this point, I think we can expect Israel to just go ahead and launch a war, either onto Syria or directly onto Iran, to suck the United States in so that your sons, your daughters will go to horrible, violent, bloody deaths in service to Israel, in service to the money junkies, in service to the military-industrial complex. These people don't care how many have to die to keep the gold flowing into their pockets here. We're getting another story. This is over at uknews.yahoo, where Israeli pilots are training for Syria and Lebanon threats. Israel is the threat, not Syria and Lebanon. All righty. And for those of you on Justin TV, we're going to have to go silent for a little bit. And I got to put the volume up here so I can talk. All right, let's talk about what's going on over in Turkey, because we've been hearing all this rhetoric and bluff and bluster coming from Erdogan. And now all of a sudden he's changing his tactic. They were, 24 hours, and this time I mean it, and they've been sending in all the police and armored vehicles and tear gas, and it's not working. It's just making the Turkish people angrier and angrier. And now all of a sudden Erdogan is backing off and saying maybe it's the time for some concessions. And he is halting the plan to bulldoze that park until the courts can rule on an appeal and possibly launch a public referendum. The problem is the protesters are skeptical and they're not impressed, because this has gone way beyond that park. The issue is not just that park. The issue is austerity. The issue is severe wealth inequality. The issue is a government that responded to the legitimate grievances of the population with brute force. And so this is a classic case of too little, too late. We're hearing from people on the ground in Turkey that the protests have spread across all walks of life. Everybody's involved, all levels, except for the money junkies, of course. Meanwhile, over in Greece, the protests there are continuing over the shutting down of the state radio and TV network, because the Greek people are seeing, just as we are seeing here in the United States of America, we have a government that absolutely takes all your money and will not spend it back on you. Look at the high taxes we're paying in this country. We don't get education for it, don't get higher education for it. They're making us pay for our own health care and making it more expensive to get that health care. They're not maintaining our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure. The money's all going to Wall Street. It's all going to Israel. It's all going to these wars of conquest. Now, the only legitimate purpose for government is to do for the community what the community needs but cannot do for themselves individually. That's the only legitimate purpose. That's the way the United States was set up. Government's job is to organize the large projects, interstate highways, harbors for shipping, cities, roads, schools, hospitals. That's the legitimate function. And the Turkish people and the Greek people and the American people understand that the government we have now is not serving the people in the nation. It is serving the money junkies. Now, here's kind of a bizarre story. Texas Governor Rick Perry, every once in a while he comes out with some really bogus stuff. And he's come out with this statement that the First Amendment right to freedom of religion does not mean that you have freedom from religion. He actually came out and said Americans don't have the right to be secular. In other words, we don't care what religion you follow, but by golly, you will follow some religion. Which is going to be good news to the followers of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and the Magic Pink Unicorns. And so Rick Perry is out there saying that if you don't have a religion, if you don't have an imaginary playmate in the sky, that you are a second-class subordinate citizen. And that's an open door to religious or atheistic persecutions. And in a way, Rick Perry is in violation of that very First Amendment, that you're not supposed to have a state religion. And Perry's attitude is there's a state religion. It can be all religions, but you must have a religion. Now, up in New York, this is being reported in From the Trenches World Report, there's another story breaking about a New York Police Department detective who has now had to basically confess that many of the murder confessions he used to put people in jail were falsified. And now they're having to go back and look at 50 murder convictions involving evidence based on this retired police detective, who apparently intimidated suspects into confessing to crimes they did not commit. Louis Scarcella, big celebrated star of the Brooklyn North Homicide Squad because of all the convictions he got, and it turned out he just literally beat the confessions out of his suspects. And of course, it's things like this is why I cannot support a death penalty. Because until we can return life to those it is wrongfully taken from, we have no business taking it in the first place. Which brings us back to the strange case of Ibrahim Todashev. This was that young man down in Florida who had been interviewed over and over and over again by the FBI, no problems. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, he winds up being shot 7 times, including a kill shot to the top of his head. Close range. It's an execution shot. And they came out and said, oh, what a shame that he went violent, because he was just about to sign that confession that would have allowed us to demonize the Tsarnaev brothers' involvement in a drug murder and his role, and he was just on the verge of signing it when he went wild, and he attacked them with a knife, and then it turned out there was no knife. And by the way, this Todashev kid was recovering from knee surgery. Doesn't sound like the sort of person who can go violent on trained FBI agents to where they have to use deadly force and shoot the guy 7 times. And this reinforces what I suspected at the time. They were trying to browbeat him or coerce him into signing this politically necessary confession. He refused, and he tried to leave. And the FBI realized as soon as he leaves, he's going to go out and say, look, the FBI is trying to coerce a confession from me. And that's when they had to kill him. And this case up in New York only underscores the point that people who are in these positions where their careers are depending upon convictions or the political necessity requires a confession, they use force, coercion, and intimidation. Their goal is not enforcement of law. Their goal is not justice. Their goal is not truth. Their goal is political expediency. Yes, it happened the way we said because we have a confession. The entire claimed link between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda was based on a single confession extracted under torture from a guy named Binyam Mohammed. So as I said, I can't support a death penalty. I absolutely cannot. The carbon Nazis are in thrash mode. I'm getting all this hate email and name-calling and various blogs that I post to in my own website and my own email box about, oh, you're under the pay of the fossil fuel companies. Well, if I am, they're like years late on the paychecks. We have that recent report by NASA that came out and said, well, actually, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere doesn't behave like a pane of glass in a greenhouse, and actually, because of heat transfer, it's acting like a coolant. So the carbon Nazis are regrouping and trying to figure out some way they can go back to their money-making scam. And we have this report out of SpaceDaily.com where the latest research, funded by the carbon Nazis probably, is that, yeah, CO2 isn't causing global warming, it's chlorofluorocarbons. So we're going to have a chlorofluorocarbon tax and chlorofluorocarbon credits, and they're trying to restart the scam on that one. Meanwhile, of course, despite these two stories, despite the fact that NASA is saying CO2 is actually cooling the atmosphere, despite several record winters in a row, despite this latest one blaming global warming as if it actually existed on chlorofluorocarbons, Obama just doubled his planned carbon tax on you. Because we have to fight global warming. They're trying to rebrand it. We have to fight climate change. Reminds me of the story of the Emperor Caligula, who went down to the beach for a grand picnic, and they set up while the tide was low. And during the picnic and the feast and the orgy and whatever else these insane Roman emperors were doing, the tide started coming in. And instead of picking up their tents and pavilions and moving a little further up the beach, Caligula ordered his troops to flog the ocean with whips to drive the tide back down. Didn't work. And I say all these politicians out there making political capital and contributions and support by saying they will fight climate change. They're operating at the same level. The forces that control climate, primarily the sun, are way beyond the ability of any human technology to influence. So they're out there flogging the carbon dioxide in the hope that you will go along with the idea and give them your money and obedience, and that too is failing. And again, anybody who says there are no wide-ranging conspiracies against ordinary people, that global warming one, you got right there, textbook case. You had multiple governments, multiple government agencies, multiple educational institutions, Al Gore, educational TV, all signed on. National Geographic signed on to this thing. Because they were all going to make money off of this. They all got funding. They all got a piece of the action from this carbon credit scam. Going to take a phone call here. Ralph in South Carolina. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy.
Howdy.
I just want to know, did I hear you say the other day that homosexuality is normal?
No, I didn't say it was normal. I said
yes,
that...
you did. You most certainly did. I heard you say it.
No, I didn't actually say that. What I actually said is that since homosexuality appears to manifest itself in situations of extreme social stress, hunger, poverty, brutality, that homosexuality might be a built-in safeguard against overpopulation. You have all these people running around saying, oh, there's too many human beings, we've got to get rid of them, we've got to have diseases, we've got to, Anytime you get into a social structure where there's a lot of stress on the people, you see the incidence of homosexuality start to increase. And so homosexuality could well be the human race's safety mechanism to keep its population under control. In which case, not only do they have an equal right to be here with everybody else, they're necessary. That's what I said. There's a little bit of a difference here. Now, I can tell from Ralph over here that he's got a problem with the gays and stuff like that. And probably one of these people says, I oppose gay marriage. Well, if you're opposed to gay marriage, don't marry a gay. Problem solved. But look at how much evil in this world comes when you have this group over here thinking they have a divine right given them by the imaginary playmate in the sky to go tell this other group how to live their lives. There is so little happiness in this world today. If these two guys or these two gals are happy living together, leave them alone. If your life is miserable, don't take it out on these other people around you who seem to be having a happy life. Maybe that's it. You have all these miserable people whose own lives don't work, and they don't want to look at the reason they don't work, so I'm going to go and I'm going to scream at the gays and the pinks and the blues and the chartreuses and the plaids, and I'm going to go and prove that I'm a superior being by telling them how to live their lives. What a load of nonsense that is. And no, I myself am not gay. I have a lovely wife. I'm your basic man on top, get it over with quick, raid the refrigerator heterosexual. But if the gays are happy being gay, leave them alone. All right. Now, getting back to serious matters here. Global warming. Story coming out of Aleppo News, and it is a critique of an article that came out in The Guardian, where the new plan by the global warming cult, the worshippers at the altar of St. Al of the Gore, is they're going to replace this decarbonization agenda because, frankly, there's no science to support it. Now the new goal is they want to mount geoengineering. We are going to re-engineer the Earth to have the ideal climate. Talk about arrogance here. They're trying to rebrand. The carbon thing didn't work out. The world has gotten colder, even though carbon dioxide's actually gone up. And by the way, as the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone up, plant growth has increased. What a blessing for a world already struggling with famine, to have the plants growing bigger and faster and yielding more crop. Unless they're GMO, in which case that's turning out to be a disaster. So now they're changing gears. They've rebranded from global warming to climate change, as if climate change is something that's not supposed to be happening all along. And they're getting away from this controlling carbon thing to massive geoengineering projects. You think we were going crazy with those solar panels and windmills before? Wait till you see what we're doing now. And it's just another money-making scam. You cannot control the Earth's climate until you can control the sun. And that is so way beyond human technology right now. It is simply not possible. It's just more snake oil. All right, going to grab another phone call here real quick before the break here. Frank in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm the only gay couple on your little film that you made.
Oh, yes, I know who you are. I know who you are, yes.
Just wanted to thank you, Ed, for that stunning piece of what you said about gays are not only all over the place and here, but they're necessary, you know.
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are. And, you know, if you believe in the imaginary playmate in the sky that put us all here on Earth, well, didn't he put the gays here as well? And doesn't that mean they have just as much right to be here? And,
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You know,
basically, the people who are not sure of their own sexuality who are the most homophobic. You know, they have these fears.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're all raised with this idea that we're supposed to be 100% purely female or 100% purely male, and that is simply not true. Every human being is a blend, and one of the things I learned when I was hanging out with the people of Mensa is the higher your IQ is, the more you tend to blend aspects of both male and female personality. But this self-feeding frenzy about, oh, I don't want to be seen as gay, and you know, they catch themselves having a tender moment, and they go, oh, and they go wash themselves in the shower, and they overreact. It's not either or. It is a continuum.
Yes, and isn't it amazing how how far everything has come in this past few years, where the president can actually come out in favor of gay marriage and get away with it, more or less, right?
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's a lot of nonsense, and I agree with you. I think it's people who are just really insecure and unsure about themselves because they're not lining up with an arbitrarily created definition of masculinity versus femininity. It's an unrealistic ideal, just like those beautiful women they used to sell you cosmetics and stuff. We're all a blend, one way or the other, and we all have a right to be here on this earth. Frank, I'm going to have to let you go here because we're coming up on a commercial break here. I got 5 more minutes before Claire is going to show up here and regale us with her perceptions. Real quick story, another article that came out, WakingTimes.com. The flu vaccine is causing 5 times more respiratory infections than people who don't get the vaccine. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we got 5 minutes before Claire is going to show up in here. Very bizarre story. This was reported over at Natural News. Over in Belgium, they're considering a law where doctors will be allowed to euthanize autistic children or seriously deformed children and Alzheimer's patients supposedly under the age of 18. And it looks to me like we've entered a world where corporations are going to put out vaccines with thimerosal in there. They're going to put out toxic chemicals, and their attitude is if it's only harming, 0.5% of the population, we'll just kill them off and everybody will be happy. And I find that a very alarming situation. They don't want to fix the problem because the products they're selling are making so much money. They're getting rich off of them, and the politicians are getting their piece of the action. And I find this a very alarming situation. Now, Monsanto is being hit with class action lawsuits over the case of the mystery GMO wheat that showed up in Oregon. And Monsanto initially said, well, we stopped growing that in 2004. We have no idea how it got there. And, of course, one theory is that pollen being what pollen does, it was hopping from field to field to field to field, and every wheat field between their test plots in 2004 and Oregon today is now contaminated with the GMO pollen and the GMO genes. And all these wheat farmers who have all of a sudden, nobody wants to buy their product, they're financially ruined, and they're suing Monsanto. And, of course, Monsanto's latest lame spin is, well, some GMO hater, some GMO denier stole our pollen from that field in 2004, and they went up and they sprayed it on this field in Oregon, and just knowing that sooner or later somebody would discover it and harm our reputation. So we have this story coming out of Belize, which has banned all GMO seeds from their country. They just discovered a field of GMO soybeans inside the country, which means that Monsanto isn't really all that concerned about legal bans on their product. They're just going to go on getting it out there. And I think the ultimate plan is, because pollen does spread beyond control, is that eventually all the food crops on Earth will be contaminated with Monsanto's patented GMO genes, and they'll be forced to sign contracts, and Monsanto will be in control of all food production on planet Earth. And that is very dangerous, because what happens when you have a monopoly? Oh, the prices will go up. You want to eat, you have to come up with the money we demand. No more growing in your own backyard. We got you now there. Same attitude we saw from the CEO of Nestle, saying that people don't have a natural right to water. It should be commoditized and commercialized. You should have to pay money to corporations to drink. We'll be right back after station. Aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 3 of our show. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is my lovely wife, Claire, who joins us every Friday in the 3rd hour with her unique perspective on what's going on. So what's your first topic?
Well, the first thing is how I think these wars, because it's not going to be a war, these wars are going to evolve. I know that Chuck Hagel and his counterpart Yalon were meeting, and Israel said that it had 3 red lines when it came to Syria. Now, what that tells me is that the Israeli government is getting ready to kick off something in Syria, essentially to push Obama's hand when it comes to Iran and getting things well and truly started there. Because I cannot see that Israel would start a military action in Syria and not expect the U.S. military to back it up.
Well, the U.S. government is already committed to supporting Israel in wars against Syria and Iran, even if Israel starts them.
Yes.
Now, from Obama's point of view, he has to be realizing right now that he has exhausted the patience of the American people, along with our economy and our military, and that a new escalation and major war could very well result in major domestic unrest here inside the United States of America. Now, from Israel's point of view, they don't care.
No.
They want the war going, and if there's problems here in the United States, you go shoot a few of the protesters and make them shut up. But Obama is definitely caught between the rock and the hard place here. He has to be understanding. The American people aren't buying the propaganda any longer. We're not buying the lies about weapons of mass destruction any longer. We know we've been lied to. We don't trust the government. We don't trust the corporate media. But Israel's completely unconcerned about what's going on inside the United States of America. Their worldview is, we've got control of the U.S. government, we're going to send them to fight these wars over there, and ultimately it's going to be great for Israel, and it's going to be great for all these private central banks who have deep emotional ties to Israel as well.
And I'd like to backtrack a little bit on some legislation that got very little attention back in February of this year. Charlie Rangel has reintroduced a bill to reinstitute the draft. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard me correctly. Reinstitute the draft. But this time, the draft will be coming after not only our young men, but our young women as well.
For combat roles.
Now, back in January, then Secretary Panetta signed an order rescinding the ban on women serving in combat units and potentially opens up about 237,000 positions to female service workers. And Charlie Rangel said something rather strange when he was talking about this legislation. And he was criticizing the majority of American people, making the statement that they made no real sacrifice when the country goes to war. And you know, I wish right now I had Mr. Rangel right here in the smallest radio studio on the planet. And I would paraphrase the Desi Arnaz phrase that he used to use to Lucy a lot and say, Mr. Representative, you've got a lot of explaining to do, because I need to ask you some questions about these wars. And the first is the Latin phrase cui bono, who benefits?
Well, we've already answered that. It's the bankers. All these wars are bankers' wars.
Yeah, and what I am seeing, and at 64, I'm sure old enough to remember going to school, college with kids who were drafted. I remember how many of them didn't come back or only came back partially. And I am looking at the war in Iraq, and we'll get to this after the break.
All right, we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire, we were talking about these rush to wars. They sold us Pearl Harbor on the supposed surprise attack, which we now know Roosevelt provoked.
Right.
A Spanish-American War, mines in Havana Harbor, which turned out not to exist. Vietnam, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, turned out not to exist.
Happened.
All these wars are started with lies.
Yeah.
Because a government that wants to start a war has to trick their people into thinking it's the only possible option. Otherwise, we're all going to stay home.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about
Charlie Rangel and this draft legislation.
Can I add one comment to that?
Sure.
This idea of saying that women aren't contributing to the nation's defense, it sounds all great and ties into all the feminism and everything, but there's a very real reason to be very worried about this. Because anybody who is planning a war, who thinks they're going to win, is thinking about the post-war economy when they need to rebuild their population of workers and taxpayers as quickly as possible. If you start placing the women at risk
Mm-hmm.
It means you're no longer thinking you're going to win that war. You're concerned you might lose it. And that is why this revelation that the new draft bill is going to draft women into combat roles is so alarming.
Yes, it is. And I look at the situation in Iraq, which was sold to the American people on an absolute pack of lies. And in that case, it was the oil. Well, guess what the upshot and outcome of the American invasion and occupation of Iraq was? It saddled the federal government with $1 trillion more in debt, that's with a T. It poisoned the people of Iraq with depleted uranium and our own soldiers.
And other chemical weapons that were used.
And thousands are now ill, and also American vets are ill, and their families are ill because of exposure to these chemicals. And what happened after the debothification of Iraq was that the government actually has wound up in the sway of, wait for it, Iran. And, now that the U.S. is out, guess who the biggest recipient of Iraqi oil is? It's China, folks. What the heck happened? You see how terribly wrong.
There is a wrinkle there because the goal of the United States wasn't simply to have access to all of Iraq's oil.
Okay.
It was to guarantee that Iraq's oil would be for sale only for dollars. Remember, that's what really led to the Iraq War. In 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for euros.
Yes.
1 year later, the United States invades, lynches Saddam, and Iraq's oil is back on the world market, but only for U.S. dollars. The only way the U.S. can prop up that paper currency is by shackling all of the world's resource-rich areas to the dollar. They go into countries who have oil and gold and any other resources, and they set it up with a new puppet government that says, yes, you can buy, anybody can buy our resources, but you have to pay for it in dollars. It's an expansion of the petrodollar to the resource dollar to try and prop up what is essentially a failed system. And the rest of the world does not want to go along with it. China certainly does not.
No.
China wants their gold-backed yuan to be the new global currency. Russia took control of their private central bank. And the world is trying to break away from these private central banks, and the U.S. military, your sons and your daughters, are being used to try and go out and force the world back onto this Ponzi banking scheme.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I am very, very concerned if there is another quote-unquote big bang. I could see Congressman Rangel's bill get passed without just even a whisper.
Well, it's actually been sitting there in committee for quite some time. This isn't something new. They've been sort of sitting on it, waiting for something to happen.
Until the right time.
Yeah, until the right time when the American people would say, yes, we need a new draft here. Grab those kiddies and send them on off to the war zone. And obviously they have failed in creating that kind of a public opinion or that kind of a public climate.
Yes.
And as you say, absent a big bang or a big germ, they're not going to get it.
Absolutely. Mike, I'd sort of like to move on to the economy and what day this is.
And what day is it, pray tell?
It is the day that Detroit begins moratorium on all debt service payments for unsecured funded debt. And Detroit is going to default on certificates of participation due today. The city has approximately $17 billion in total liabilities, and the city is insolvent and can't meet its financial obligations without a quote-unquote significant restructuring. And we all know what that means.
Take more away from the people to give to the bankers. The question I have right now is how many credit default swaps were sold against Detroit's debt? Because remember, you don't have to actually own that debt to buy a credit default swap on it. The exposure in credit default swaps on Detroit's debt could be far greater than that, what is it, $17 billion?
$17 billion, yes.
Could be far greater than that. And we may see some very dramatic changes to the stock market on Monday.
Yeah, that could be a very interesting situation. I'd like to sort of bounce back, if you're okay with this, to Israel. And Israel has done something very interesting. They have just approved more than 1,000 homes for Jewish people only in 2 settlements deep in the West Bank. And the State Department...
Imagine my shock.
And the State Department, Jen Psaki, said, certainly we find this unhelpful, but please notice, nowhere is the U.S. government going to do and exert the only leverage it has over Israel, which is to completely pull all the financial and military aid away from it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that shows, how completely under the control of Israel our government is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's wrong for them to build settlements on other people's land, but we're going to go on signing the paychecks that pay for it all.
Yeah, and I would like to respectfully take this moment to remind every one of our congressional members that aid to Israel is completely, absolutely, no question about it, completely illegal under the Symington Amendment because they refuse to sign the NNPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement. Nuclear. And refuse to have their...
You were born in the Eisenhower years, obviously.
Yes, I was, as a matter of fact. And they will not allow their nuclear sites to be inspected. And when we see Congress breaking the law, holding some of the highest and most powerful offices in the land...
Our government break the law?
Yes. With impunity.
Are you kidding me? I had no idea.
With absolute impunity.
Yes. Laws are just for you serfs and slaves to obey. The nobility are above that.
Oh, speaking of serfs and slaves.
Yes.
Obama.
Serfs up.
Obama. Oh, that was so mean.
We're punchy. It's Friday afternoon. Yeah. We're tired. We got to go feed the hungry later on this afternoon, and I'm punchy. Go ahead.
But
I'm sorry.
Obama told a group of contributors very privately that he is going to unveil his climate measures next month. Mm-hmm. And in light of the fact that climate is unlikely to take up a climate bill, especially with the...
You mean Congress is unlikely to take up a climate bill? Yes,
Congress is unlikely to take up a climate bill. The plans are going to be done completely via executive order.
Which is not what the executive order was all about, but Congress will not enforce, or they will not avail themselves of their option to vote down an executive order.
Right.
See, let me go back and explain what's going on here. The executive order is the instrument by which the president executes the will of the Congress. It goes, if the president signs an order, it goes into the Federal Register. Congress has 30 days to consider what the president is doing, and if necessary, they can vote the executive order, rescind it. They hardly ever do. In fact, I can't remember off the top of my head when they did. But the executive order is not there to allow the president to basically enact laws on his own signature. That's not in the Constitution. And we are seeing more and more where Obama is issuing executive orders that are completely out of his actual authorization to do this, and Congress won't stand up to him. And more we're seeing where the president is implementing his policy via executive orders and completely bypassing the Congress. Now, we know that Obama has already gotten through his doubling of the carbon tax with a rider into a bill that was supposed to be about microwave safety and emissions. So, again, they're cheating to get what they want. And even as we've had all these record cold winters, they're still out there saying carbon dioxide and global warming, and you've got to give us carbon taxes. It's just all about grabbing more of your wealth.
And they're making it up as they go along.
They're making it up as they go along. 10 years ago, global warming means there'll be no more snow, and here today they're saying global warming is why we have more snow. It's just, and they're going along absolutely saying, you will believe us. If you're a loyal American, you will believe what we tell you, even if it's completely different from what we told you yesterday. We are really in George Orwell's world, where, if you remember, the main protagonist, Winston Smith, his job is to sit there, and every time the government changes its mind, he goes back to all the older newspapers and changes them to keep the story straightened out. Oh, we didn't say 10 years ago snow would be a thing of the past. Of course, no, we didn't say it. Just like, who was it? Nancy Pelosi was out there the other day saying, we never promised you your health care premiums would be lower under Obamacare. And that's, of course, that's exactly what they said when they were selling that whole situation.
Yeah. I know. I would like to revisit what you were talking about with Senator Feinstein.
Okay, well, we're coming up on a commercial break here, and so rather than let you get started and have to trip you up here, I'm just going to yak during the last few seconds until we get our commercial music coming back on, which should be happening Any minute here. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we will be. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, Claire, you wanted to talk about Dianne Feinstein, who, if you believe those electronic voting machines, is an elected representative of the people.
Right. And when she made that statement that the NSA only needs to believe that there is a reasonable cause to believe someone is connected to terrorism, and everyone is suspect. Everyone is liable for this kind of intrusion.
And remember, that list of indicators of possible terroristic activity that the government put out years ago includes people who support and defend the Constitution.
I'm one.
Yeah, I remember seeing a list of like something 13 signs that you are a potential terrorist, and I think the only one I did not qualify under was being fanatically religious.
Or a veteran.
Yeah, even veterans are automatically.
And
so with a broad-reaching net like that, Feinstein's attitude is, we have reasonable cause to search anybody's life. And, of course, this is so completely contrary to the Fourth Amendment.
Yes.
And the reason the Fourth Amendment was in the Bill of Rights is while the British were in charge of the colonies, King George III authorized the British soldiers and representatives to enter any home at any time to make sure they weren't having those bad thoughts about the king. And that is that's the history of why that Fourth Amendment is there. The government is supposed to mind its own business until they know for certain there is a probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. There must be a warrant issued by a court specifically saying this is what we're looking for. And they're not allowed to go anywhere else. But Feinstein, by her statement, has just declared herself to be un-American or anti-American.
And I was thinking, I would love to hear some phone calls by her husband, Richard Bloom, who was the head of CBRE. And guess what somehow he landed with, dear?
Oh, I'll bet it's a huge, lucrative government contract.
Oh,
but
yes.
we don't need to wish or wonder. We'll just call the NSA. I'm sure they have that phone call by now.
He is the chairman of the CBRE group, and what happened was CBRE got the sole contract to sell post office buildings that were being abandoned and no longer being used. And, it's just... you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I mean, the use of this inside information...
Or go postal.
Well, I don't tend to do that. And apparently Feinstein and her husband are going to make a pretty penny from this. But sole contractor, and of course the American people whose money built those post offices are never going to get it back. It's gone.
It is, and we've seen this time and time again, and it's one of the reasons why when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, it is not enough to have the president's wealth in a blind trust so that his decisions are not influenced by his own personal financial interest. We know presidents evade that. We know Clinton evaded that. But in the new America, anybody who's in a public office, anybody, any official, elected or appointed, has to have their wealth in a blind trust, so their own personal financial interests will not control their decision-making. And the strongest case for that, of course, goes back to 2008 and TARP, where they violated the Constitution by creating this TARP legislation in the Senate. And the Constitution says revenue measures must originate in the House. Then they arm-twisted the House into going along with it. And the reason they did it, and the reason they were willing to break the rules is members of Congress have their own personal investment wealth with those companies who are up to their necks in this mortgage-backed security fraud. And so these members of Congress were not looking out for you. They were not looking out for the nation. They were not even looking out for the economy as a whole. They were basically protecting their own wealth on the backs of the American taxpayers by changing the laws to make themselves richer and you poorer. And that is why in the new America, anybody who wants to work in government, they've got to be willing to put their entire wealth into a completely blind trust. And if they don't want to go along with that, then they're welcome to find some other line of endeavor.
Yes, absolutely. Because the millions and billions that can be made on that insider trading are just overwhelming.
It is. I mean, you have to wonder why so many of, especially people who've been in Congress for a long, long time, how incredibly wealthy they are. They're not getting that wealthy on that little salary.
No.
That they're being paid.
No, not at all.
They're taking advantage. And it's not just members of Congress. We had that scandal, I think it was about a week ago, where hundreds and hundreds of workers at the Department of Health were getting advance notice of changes to policy that were going to boost the earnings of insurance companies, and so they were all in a position to call their broker and say, get me 5,000 shares of United Health Insurance Lint Incorporated, amalgamated, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just wide open for corruption. And just like we know that 25% of the people on Wall Street openly admit to fraud being a normal part of their daily business, I imagine that at least that many, if not more, people in Washington, D.C. would be candid about admitting the same thing. Yeah, it goes on. It's part of life. You know, it's part of the price you pay to live in the greatest nation on earth. Blah, 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 blah.
It's part of the culture.
It's part of the culture of corruption, and it must go. It's going to bring itself down. Just sit quietly, be patient, don't give them an excuse to shoot you. It will come crashing down. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, you had one more topic you wanted to cover.
Yes. The U.S. government has decided to park U.S. military resources in Jordan after a military exercise called Eager Lion, which is due to end the end of this month. Now, the good reason is that with consultations with the Jordanian government, they were anxious about a spillover of violence and a growing influx of refugees. And the officials just said it was decided the assets would remain in place. But, Mike, to me, the American leaving of those assets there speaks volumes about the U.S. future's intention for
They're
Syria.
pre-positioning an invasion force on the ground. I mean, this is not just a bunch of soldiers running around training. They've got F-16s, they've got heavy weapons, they've got armored vehicles. I thought the exercise was over. I didn't realize it was going to continue for a little while. But again, the situation in Turkey appears to be deteriorating. The U.S. could lose that bridgehead into Syria, and I think that's why they're already starting to think about, let's rethink this Turkey thing. We'll invade Syria from Jordan, and that seems to be what they're getting ready to do.
Yeah, this is an expensive proposition, and you don't keep men and material on the ground unless you plan to use
Well, I don't care how much it costs. We've got those American taxpayers. Go back and get more from them. We'll tell them it's for global warming or something.
But I do hope that the precious few adults in the room in the bowels of power in Tel Aviv and D.C. have been asking themselves recently, if there is an overt attack against Syria, what is Vladimir Putin prepared to do to stop it? Now, you said that he had made some sort of threat in that direction.
Well,
or observation. Promise.
The Russian government, through then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and current Secretary of State John Kerry, has said that if the U.S. invades Syria and or Iran, Russia is committed into transforming those into the new Vietnam. They will simply pour in money and weapons and grind the United States down in a war of attrition.
Proxy war.
Proxy war of attrition, which Russia's got the resources to do it and the United States does not.
And that's something that's really important for people to understand right now. Right at this moment in the United States history, the U.S. government doesn't have the money, it doesn't have the troop strength, and it certainly doesn't have the manufacturing capability to be able to prevail and guarantee a positive outcome in a conventional war. And this is what makes it so crazy.
Yeah, because sometime, you know, if they move into Syria and Iran, sometime between that moment and final capitulation by the United States government, they will feel very strongly tempted to turn those little brass keys in the missile silos, and it's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock.
Right.
Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, we're seeing all of a sudden these articles appearing, and the one that I linked to was in BusinessInsider.com, saying, we don't need to worry, Russia is going to back down over Syria. They don't want to be associated with the government that's using chemical weapons on their own people. We already know Russia's come out and said, we don't believe you. It's a complete fabrication.
That's hubristic, wishful thinking.
It absolutely is, because Russia understands this is not about Syria. This is about returning the world to Bretton Woods. This is about the dollarification of all the world's resource-rich areas. This is about the fact that Russia took control of their central bank. Russia knows war with the United States is now inevitable, and because of what happened in World War II, where the Nazis got within 20 miles of Moscow, if Russia is saying war with the U.S. is inevitable, better we should fight it in Syria and Iran than in the streets of Moscow itself. And that's why this article in Business Insider, it's founded on a false premise that everybody is believing this crap about Assad using chemical weapons on his own people. And it goes from there. And you're right. It's hubristic. It's wishful thinking.
It's codswallop.
It absolutely is.
Nonsense.
With steroids.
Yes, definitely.
Anything else?
That's it, and thank you so much for letting me participate.
Well, thank you very much for bringing your perceptions in. I'm going to pull your microphone down now, and we're going to go on back to cover some other stories. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Interesting story just came up over at The Independent. You want to talk about complete tyranny and dictatorship. Apparently, over in the city of Kent, the police have warned a 10-year-old girl that drawing the hopscotch board on the sidewalk with chalk constitutes criminal damage for which she can be arrested. We've all seen hopscotch. Kids go out with chalk, they draw the thing, and they hop back and forth on it. And now, under the tyranny of Great Britain, that's criminal damage. You're damaging our sidewalks. Probably realize they've had so many low bidders come in on those sidewalks, a piece of chalk could actually break one of those things in half. But I'll tell you what I think is really going on. It's all about, oh, you can't draw hopscotch on the sidewalk anymore. No doubt some large corporation that has made generous donations to politicians is coming out with a new hopscotch mat on sale at your local store that you will go and buy and put on the ground to play hopscotch. And we can't have you drawing your own hopscotch lines with chalk. That'll cut into our profits. You wait, I'll bet you will actually see that come out there. Oh, no, drawing hopscotch, that's criminal. You have to go buy the hopscotch mat. And that, too, is fascism at work. Now then, we've been talking a lot about the perils of nuclear technology, and apparently more than a few U.S. nuclear plants are starting to experience problems from the fact that they have not been properly maintained. They are operating way past their original design lifespans. And we've talked a lot about San Onofre, which is a good illustration of money junkie thinking at work, because a while back they decided they were going to put in some new and larger heat exchangers so they could generate more electricity off the reactor and make more profit. So far, so good. They told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that it was routine maintenance, so they could evade inspection, and it subsequently came out that whoever specified the heat exchange tubings for these larger exchangers went with a cheaper metal alloy that almost immediately, under the neutron bombardment, began to deteriorate and corrode and led to the failure of the heat exchanger. And they've been in there trying to clear it up, trying to clean up the mess and restart it. Now, Southern California Edison has announced they're going to shut the entire plant down because they don't know if they can fix it and get it working again. So that twin reactor in San Onofre is going to be shut down. And it will sit there on the beach for years and years and years and years as a monument to what happens when you let the money junkies make the key safety decisions on critical infrastructure. Whether it's cheaper tubing in the heat exchangers, we don't need to build the tsunami wall that high over at Fukushima. Over and over and over again, we see that when corporate financial interests are in charge of the nation will suffer. Now, getting back to the carbonazis and the green, environmental, whatever, there's an interesting story over at the Daily Mail where they're talking about how these wind farms have turned out to be a complete scam. Huge tax incentives. A lot of wind farms in Britain were built in places that don't even really have wind, but they got the financial taxpayer-backed incentives to build these things to prove we're looking at alternative energy. One of the most commonly used turbines around the world for these projects, turns out its lifespan is only half of what was promised. They're falling apart. One of the companies that provides the turbines has now gone out of business, so you can't even get spare parts or repair on these things. And, of course, the same environmentalists who were saying, oh, these are wonderful for the environment, now they're all upset because these wind turbines are killing birds whose migration routes are flying right through where these wind turbines are. We're going to go to the phones. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Really, the Russians have much more sway. If you consider the oil pipelines and gas pipelines from Gazprom and Rosoil, they can close these down very slowly, only 50%, say. And guess what's going to happen to the price of oil and gas around the world?
It will go right through the roof.
They can really squeeze the U.S.
Well, I think that was why the Obama administration sort of green-lit this very dangerous deep oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico down into these, extremely high-pressure deposits. And the Minerals Management Service wasn't really keeping an eye. We know now that the manual blowout preventer underneath the Deepwater Horizon was like 4 years overdue for its regular maintenance. And when you're working in the deep ocean, that maintenance is important. It doesn't just sit there. I mean, there's pressure, corrosion, salt corrosion, galvanic corrosion. You got to keep an eye on this stuff, and that's why the disaster happened. And I think Obama's goal was to bring that huge, deep oil deposit online so that they could say to the rest of the world, we can invade Iran, and you don't have to worry about Iran's oil coming off the world market because we've got this new source of oil that will cover the shortfall. Sadly, that did not work out, but they're still going ahead with the invasion of Iran.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is that people haven't factored in this shortfall on oil. I mean, if you just close it down just by 50%, the price goes up. Russia doesn't lose any revenue, but guess what it does to the rest of the planet?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And we ordinary Americans understand that any more war in the Mideast is going to directly hit us in the wallet for the gas and oil prices. But the governments who are behind this, they don't care. You realize how much tax money the U.S. gets on gasoline here in the United States of America? It's based on a percentage. So if the price of gasoline goes up at the pump, the government actually makes more money off of you. So they have a financial incentive to let gas prices go on up until the point where the diminishing returns in terms of the harm to commerce start to come in. They're looking for that optimum of whatever it is that extracts the maximum amount of wealth from the population. That's their entire thinking. How do we get more out of the society? Well, we let gas prices rise until the point where commerce starts to slow down and negates that effect. And they're looking for that point in the curve that maximizes profitability.
Well, in this particular situation in Syria, I mean, my opinion is that Russia holds all the aces.
I would tend to agree with you. Now, supposedly Russia is still holding off on those S-300 missiles because I don't think Russia wants to see this come into open warfare, but they're still trying to figure out some way to derail this whole thing. The good news is, based on all the wishy-washy wording that we're coming out of Washington, D.C., this latest red line chemical weapons fraud has fallen flat on its face. It's cratered big time, and they're sending the small weapons to the rebels because they have to act like they're doing something. But so far, the talk about a no-fly zone and U.S. airstrikes in support of the hired mercenaries doesn't seem to be moving forward at this time. That, of course, could change. But again, I think from Obama's point of view is he realizes any more wars are going to be seen as a negative by the American people. He understands we're really at the point of standing up and saying it's time for this government to go. The next war could easily trigger mass domestic disturbances here in the United States of America. And it's one thing for the government to set up a phony armed march into Washington, D.C. that can be brutally crushed as a lesson to the rest of the serfs. But if all 300 million Americans stand up at the same time and say this government has to go, the government is going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also point out that the backpedaling by Holland and Cameron, who were all gung-ho for this war, to the last American soldier. But now they're backing off. We are seeing statements rescinding this no-fly zone sort of idea because they are in fear of what could happen. to their little toys. So it seems to be that this chemical weapon thing was an attempt to promote it, but people now are backing off big style.
Well, I'm sure these other world leaders are looking at their own populations and realizing that the propaganda to support the war isn't working there any more than it's working here. They're looking at what's going on in Turkey. That's got to be a cautionary tale, that you can only push and oppress a population to support a war so far when they'll turn on the government. And again, it is a completely different world in terms of how information flows through society. And those old models of government lies to the media feeds the lies to the people just go along with it, that world does not exist anymore. It's gone, and it will not come back.
Yeah, well, keep up the good work, Michael. I'm going to say aloha for now. I listen to you every day. Keep on going, boy. We need you.
All right. Thank you very, very much. We're going to keep on going here just as long as we can here. Now, we're getting this interesting story out of Ex-Republic TV. Apparently, the NSA, has come up with their own list of talking points they are giving to all their friends in Congress and the media on how to defend the surveillance programs. Here are the lies you will tell the people to make them feel that it's okay with us stealing their business data, peeking at their sexy messages they're sending their significant other, all of it in violation of the Constitution. They're full court press. It's all propaganda. And I think the good news about Floodgate is that from the point of view of the U.S. government, they understand right now they have lost what vestige of trust and credibility they had with the American people. And that makes selling a new war all that much more difficult. Like I said, they could be desperate enough to try something really dramatic, like a nuclear bomb somewhere in the United States of America, blowing up the Golden Gate Bridge, which is about due for replacement anyway, or spreading anthrax on a bunch of cities that just happen to be Republican strongholds. But absent something dramatic like that, this government has lost control of what the American people are thinking. And they don't know how to deal with that, because they've been in control of what you think for so long. They're used to it. They don't know any other way to operate the country. And that's why they're doomed. I know the way to save the country, and that is to stand up and come clean and say, yeah, we lied about all these other things. We lied about the 16th Amendment. Private central banking is a failed model. We're going to get rid of it, write off all that artificially created debt. Give us a chance to start over and redeem ourselves. And I think most Americans would say, yeah, we'd rather do that than have a bloody revolution in the street. But this government can't do it because it's trapped by that accumulated burden of lies from the last 200 years. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the end of our show on our Pauhana Friday, heading into the weekend. Just wondering what insane stunt this government is going to try and pull to keep us under their control. So, anyway, we have a caller on the line, last call for the day. Don in Ohio. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day. I was curious about something. I heard a while back that before Israel got the land that they did, they got the Palestinian land, they were offered Madagascar, and Russia and China actually gave up some land space where they can go, to keep the peace in the world and stuff like that. Do you know what this place is called?
Madagascar.
What is it called?
Madagascar. And by the way, the German government said, we're going to conquer Africa, and, you can have Madagascar all to yourself. There actually is a Jewish state inside Russia. It's way off over on the east side. I forget the name of it. But it was set up a long time ago, even before Israel. And it is a little state within a state that is completely Jewish, and they just live the lives the way they want to, and everybody's happy. And there are no problems over there. But the Zionists, they wanted Jerusalem. They wanted the Holy Lands. They wanted whatever. Their entire policy and agenda is set by the imaginary playmate in the sky and the mythologies coming out of the Old Testament. And then that's okay when you're a little tribal kingdom with spears and clubs, but in the nuclear age, it is so dangerous to have the people in control of these nuclear weapons listening to the voices in their head and thinking it's the voice of God.
Yeah, I wonder if we can petition Russia to give the expats of America a little space so we can have our republic back, at least in another area if we need to go someplace.
Well, I got to tell you here, I'm starting to look very with longing eyes over at Gus Kino, which is the Russian film industry over there. I wonder if they're getting into computer animation and visual effects and need a teacher over there. All righty, thank you. We're going to let you go. We're almost to the end of the show here. Real quick story. This was reported in Red Dirt Report. Apparently, after these major storms in Oklahoma, there was this pastor who came out screaming how those atheists did nothing to help their fellow neighbors in the wake of the storms, and apparently got called on it. And he's now had to come out and say, yeah, I was wrong. Those heathens, those unbelievers, they were actually out there doing nice things as well. And I ran this story because, you know, obviously my wife and I were involved in 2 programs here to feed the hungry on Oahu, and Claire's religious and I am not. And it doesn't really matter. We're just out there doing what needs to be done for the community at a time when the community desperately needs it. So we're coming up on the end of the show, and I just want to leave you with the thought, it looks like this rush to escalate the war into Syria has stumbled badly. Let us not lose sight of the reason they were trying to do it. Floodgate, all of these scandals, Benghazi, IRS, Department of Justice, NSA spying. You need to be angry. We'll be back on Monday. Please remember to support Republic Broadcasting as much as you can. They really need it. We're trying to grow onto satellite and other means of broadcast to reach Americans. They're asking questions. We want to help guide them to the answers. Thank you for everything that you've already done to this point, and aloha, America.